Welcome back to Uncommon Christianity. And today I want to begin a conversation that I believe is long overdue. And it's one not about tradition and it's not one about reaction. It's about weight, it's about seriousness. And the conversation that I want to have is about the Lord's Supper. But before we speak about the Lord's Supper, I want to talk about something the scripture treats with tremendous seriousness, and that's memorials. Now, in our culture, a memorial is sentimental, but in scripture, memorials are sacred. A memorial is not nostalgia, it was covenant anchoring. Under the old covenant, God established memorials repeatedly. In Exodus chapter 12, speaking of the Passover, he said this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Notice the language: a memorial, a feast throughout your generations. This was something that was binding. It was sacred, and it defined identity. Another time, when Israel crossed the Jordan, God commanded that 12 stones be taken from the riverbed and set up as a memorial. Now, in Joshua chapter 4, it tells us why. It says, so then your children will ask, and you shall let your children know concerning the crossing, concerning the stones. So memorials preserved revelation. Memorials were guarding the covenant memory. Memorials keep the people from drifting away. God also instituted other feasts, like the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles. These were not empty rituals. They were all covenant anchors. Because, God knows something about us, the man that he made, and the state of the human heart. We forget. We drift away. We can easily lose conviction. So what he did then, he built memorials into the life of his people. Now, I want to consider something carefully concerning the memorial, because if memorials under the shadows, so when I say shadows, I'm referring to the old covenant, which was the shadow of things to come. If memorials carried such weight in the shadow, how much more weight would a memorial carry under the fulfillment? When Jesus sat with the 12, he was not inventing some casual observation. Remember, he was sitting inside the most sacred covenant memorial Israel had at that time. They were participating in the Passover. For generations, Israel gathered under the blood that was shed that day that the memorial was instituted for. Remember, the lamb was slain, the house was marked, everyone inside lived, everyone outside perished. So that meal defined belonging, it defined identity, it defined who was under the blood. And that's the setting. Jesus was in when he took the bread and said, "This is my body." He took the cup and said, "This is the blood of the new covenant." He was not diminishing the Passover memorial. He was transforming it. He was transferring the covenant memory from what happened in Egypt, all of those years ago, to what is about to happen on Calvary. Because then he said, "This do in remembrance of me." Friends, that is covenant language. That is memorial language. When Paul later writes, he says concerning it, "As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Lord's death till he come." The Last Supper that we refer to, that Jesus participated in, of the Passover supper, was the instituting of our memorial. But it's more than to remember an event. He was proclaiming the new covenant. And it does not only declare his death, it declares what his death has created. Cause Paul wrote also in chapters of Corinthians, he said in chapter 10, "For we being many are one bread and one body." So the bread, by Paul's understanding, does not just represent Christ's body in his physical body that died on Calvary, but it declares that his broken body made us partakers of his body. That's why when Paul rebuked them in chapter 11 so severely, it was not because they were gathering. They were rebuked because they contradicted what the very memorial they were gathering for declared. It said some were hungry, some were full, some were shamed, some were disregarded. What Paul said to them, "You are not discerning the Lord's body." They were failing to recognize one another as covenant members. Brethren, here's my burden. We have kept the symbol of it, but we have not kept the weight of it. We gather in large assemblies and we distribute small little portions, a piece of bread, a little bit of grape juice. We pause briefly, and then we move on to the next thing. I fear that in most, maybe all places, we have lost the sanctification of the Lord's table. Because it's not about the quantity of the bread or the juice or the wine, whatever it is we partake of. It's about covenant consciousness. The early believers, they broke bread house to house. They gathered around tables. They looked in the eyes of one another. They waited for one another. They discerned one another. But it was in an embodied proclamation that was happening, and it reinforced identity when they partook. In the case when they partook in 1 Corinthians, it also exposed selfishness, as it also should declare unity. So see, memorials matter to God, and the Lord's Supper is our new covenant memorial. If the old covenant memorials guarded Israel from forgetting their deliverance, how much more must this memorial, the Lord's Supper, guard us from forgetting who and what Christ has done? This is not nostalgia. This is the restoration of the weight of it. In our next episode, we are going to examine a little more closely the Passover. And we'll look at its structure and its sacredness, its covenant seriousness. And we will trace how Jesus deliberately fulfilled and transformed it into the table that we now celebrate. When we understand the weight of what the old memorial stood for, I think then we could understand the gravity of the new memorial. And if what I am teaching in these podcasts is a blessing to you, and you think that they're helpful, you would be helpful to me if you can share them and like them and help get my message and my voice beyond your podcast. Until next time, let Christ be seen in you, and stay safe.